Let's do it.
Welcome, Nope Coach listeners. This is your host, Suzanne Kohlberg, episode 20. And today I have an amazing guest with me, Linda Katz, and we're going to be talking about the Tyrant King. So without further ado, actually, before I hand over to Linda, what comes to mind when you hear the Tyrant King? For whatever reason, a movie comes to mind for me. Is it Labyrinth? I don't know. It's just, I feel like an evil movie character going like, "Mwah, ha, ha, ha." It just comes. I always like to think about something before, because we tend to get a frame when we hear a word and then someone defines it and then we're like, oh, well, of course. But beforehand, what comes to mind when you think of the Tyrant King? Or the other thing comes to mind for me is fairy tales, like your changeling and the evil fairy king. And anywho, I'll stop rambling now and hand you over to Linda, who's going to talk to us about the Tyrant King. So take it away.
Yes. So I encountered recently, actually, in a childhood book that I loved that was Swedish, like a version of the Tyrant King. The whole story tells the story of my work in a children's book, which is fascinating. And the Tyrant King there is the one who abducts the little girl. And then her friend, who is a troll, has to go save her with the help of the wise woman in the woods. It's like the old tree woman. Yeah.
Oh my
And
God, that's like
man,
it's like you downloaded and they downloaded and other people. I think it's just that's a thing to start before we get a lot of us entrepreneurs or people in general. We have an idea and then we are afraid to dive into it or run with it, and or people might judge us. Oh, you're just copying theirs. But I believe like the universe, source, whatever you want to call it, inspiration, and you look at things that were discovered at the same time and given like dual discoveries, or space race or flight race where people had the same thing. So I love that confirmation that somebody else has downloaded that very same framework that you have.
Yeah, and told it in a children's book format. And it's amazing. So there, the Tyrant King is the Stone King who basically abducts the little girl. And so for me, when I consider the Tyrant King energy, it's very prevalent in our society. It's dysfunctional, unbalanced masculine energy. So it's when our doing and our productivity, we basically get stuck there because there's no being and there's no feeling to balance it out. And so rather than our productivity and our doing coming from what really matters to us, it becomes like an end in itself. So it's this like constant level of having to produce, because if I stop, then who am I? What am I? Where do I source my worth from? And it tends to, one of the easiest ways I think that we can see when this energy like sneaks in is that we're like shooting all over ourselves. There's a lot of this like, oh, but I should really do this, or I should really do that, or one should do this. It can even be like a step removed where it's this like, everyone should do this. This is how things are. And so the Tyrant King tends to paint with very broad strokes. So things are rendered in black or white. So there's very little room for nuance. There's very little room for gray area. There's very little room for like the messiness of life when we are kind of inhabiting the Tyrant King energy. And it's really, it can be tricky to get out of it because it's the water that we swim in, right? It's like we have to keep going. It's the life hacks. It's, like, I'm going to squeeze as much into every day as possible, like that kind of an energy that never, like I said, it's not necessarily bad in and of itself. It's just that it has no balance point. So oftentimes, yeah.
I was going to say, I love how you describe it as an energy. So like, I would take that further. And if it doesn't resonate, like feel free to jump in, but like an archetype is a pattern of behavior. So, an energy, a mask that we put on. It's not all of who we are in every day, but it's a mask that we put on. So, and in some places and stages, I can imagine that energy, that archetype would be useful, but not all the time, and not at the expense of, like when you were saying, productivity above everything else and shoulds, and living in that, like putting that mask on and not taking it off. Like I'm a what's her name? Sarah J. Maas fan. And in one of her book series, the people had been cursed and they couldn't take their mask off. So I think how many of us have cursed ourselves to not take off that Tyrant King energy and to be productive at all costs, and produce at all costs and take action at all costs, even if we're exhausted, even if we're depleted. Because if we pause or if we stop, I know for me, when I'm fully embodying that Tyrant King energy, the fear is if I stop, I won't start again. So, when you're really in it, and I loved how the other thing that you described is like water, like being a fish in water. Fish don't notice the water because they're in it. So sometimes when you step into these patterns of behavior, sometimes someone lovingly pointing it out to you, and you and I have known each other for quite some time, and you are very loving when you point out patterns of behavior to me, and it's like, ew. At first I'm like, no, which is a very Tyrant King thing to do, but then it's kind of like, oh.
Yeah. And I think that there's oftentimes good reason for the fear that you were saying about, like, sometimes it can feel like, well, if I stop, I'm not going to get started. Because what I've found is that the more that we stay in that energy, it's like the swings are wide, right? Because it's like if we've been overproducing and overproductive for a really long time, like the swing over to the other direction is going to be more pronounced. And that might mean that I have to take a longer time to just not do anything, to allow myself. And that can be really uncomfortable to wait, like in that space, for the internal impulse to do that doesn't come from the pushing or the forcing energy.
Yeah. Well, if you think about it like a battery, if you deplete your battery on your phone or your car, if you've got an electric car or whatever it is, to zero, it's going to take a lot longer to charge than if you were like, oh, hang on, I'm getting low. And I think, speaking of our energy or our individual capacity, things drain us. Sometimes even things that we want to do, they take capacity. So, going to my kids' school events, I want to be there. I like seeing them speak or do their play or whatever, but I find that really draining. But if I force, it's like I don't allow, like, this is going to be a capacity spend. I need to recharge. I'm like, I can still work a full day. I can still have a full client roster. I can, fit all of this in. I can feel the Tyrant energy coming in, because when I'm in that mode, the school play isn't productive. This is not income producing. So I can't allow it when I'm in that mode time in my calendar, because it's not something that is producing. But when I'm not in that energy and I'm feeling more balanced, I'm like, well, this is going to take capacity from me. So it needs allowances. So it's funny, at the time of recording this, you and I are recording in the morning for me. I know it's the afternoon for you. And my husband was supposed to take the kids to school. And then he's like, I've been called into the office, and he just drives off. And I'm like, oh, shit. And I was going to postpone this because I know you would have been okay. But I was like, okay, now I just have to kind of rearrange this stuff in my head, because I'm now responsible for the lunches and the drop off, and not that these things, like, obviously this is happening, but this is also a spend of energy and time. But if I'm in my Tyrant King energy, well, I've got to do a full work day as well. That's when things start to become really unbalanced.
Yes. It's when we try to squeeze everything in, like that kind of like, I can do it all. And that's, it becomes, I love what you shared there too, about that it's just noticing before our battery gets to zero, that it's like, oh, like what, and getting curious, like, what are the signs of, oh, my battery's at 50%. It might be time to like recharge a little bit. Like getting accustomed to and curious about the signs and symptoms within ourselves of, how does this show up for me? I know when I start getting really frustrated with my dog because she's like next to me and I feel like she wants something from me.
Yes.
If I'm like down at 25%, I'm like, I don't have time right now, like I'm just like, go do your own thing. Versus if I have that, then I can show up actually more honestly, and I can show up for what truly matters to me more.
I love this. And I think something for listeners to consider: what are your signs that your battery is low? And for me, it's so funny when you say that, when I'm really like hanging out with a Tyrant King mask on, I have an allocation of how much battery drain each thing takes, and then no more. And then if something, because the thing is, it depends. Like our energy expenditure depends on how well rested we are, how well we are. Like I know when I'm sick, everything takes a lot more. So many different things that we can't, like it's very tyranty to say, this is this many points and this is this many points. And then it's like, actually, and I remember not that long ago, I took some time off, like a couple of weeks. I was between rounds of my program and I came back into week 1 and I was tired. Like I had no spoons. I did a whole episode on, spoon allocation. And I was like, you're not allowed to be tired. You've just had a holiday. Like I was like, oh, hello. Because we are energy beings, and sometimes and other times you can have everything going and you're still fine. And it's the most bizarre thing.
Yep. It's like our lives are not an equation. So attempting to like apply a math equation to it, it ends up feeling really rigid, and that's, again, that's because we live in this culture where, it's like, oh, but if I can only, like, I've done this to myself so many times, if I could only just really manage my calendar and like,
if I can find a productivity hack,
one day, I will be able to do it all and I will feel relaxed. And I'm like, I've found one thing that helps me, and that is putting less shit on my calendar. Like more spaciousness in the day, more time to go sit outside when the weather is nice, putting my feet in the grass, more time to dance, more time to journal to myself in the morning. It's like, that's what really gives me the sense of spaciousness that I'm looking for, not like very
and when the weather is
managing my calendar.
The weather just dropped in, as you were saying, is a whole other thing. Seasonally, we have different energies and stuff because they're different days. And I love how you said the one thing. So I used to look for the right planner. Like I have a shelf, like a graveyard shelf of planners. I was like, wasn't this one? It wasn't that one. And I was like, how much can I squeeze out of this time? That's a very Tyrant energy. But now, as you said, like I start my planning with rest. Like the very first thing I put into my calendar is downtime. And old me, or when Tyrant King me comes in, it's like, oh, look at all this available space to do. And it's like, oh, hello. Because when I am rested, man, I can be productive. I'm a powerhouse. But when I'm at 10%, I do a lot of stuff, but none of it's any good.
Yes. Yeah. And then it's like the productivity feels good. It's like sometimes we get into the mode and we're in the flow because we're coming from that rested place. And then it's not depleting. It's like, it's just this, it's like we're one coherent being, rather than it's like I have to leave my body and my heart and my soul over here while I'm like marching to this increasingly fast beat over here in my Tyrant King life.
Yeah. And for anyone listening, the final thought, because we're at time, but if you're still not relating to this, my invitation for you is, have you ever stayed up late to finish something, whether it be a school project or something for work, and you stay up late and you stay up late and it's still not done, and you get to the point where you're like, fuck it, and you go to bed and then you wake up in the morning and you knock it out in like 10 minutes. So it's like, I can't be the only one. This still happens to me to this day. It's kind of like staying up later and forcing is not the problem, is not the solution. It's kind of like from a rested place, because it's like when you're frantically trying to find something, and then later when you've just given up trying to find it, it just turns up, or you just see it because you're not tired, and you literally look past it in your frantic searching, but then you feel like it's good, you're productive, so that's okay. And it's like, if what's that quote? If I had 6 hours to chop down a tree, or 7 hours, I'd spend the 6 hours, first 6 sharpening my axe. How many of us would just go hammer and tongs, chop, 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 this tree better fall, as opposed to, okay, I'm going to prepare my tools so the job doesn't take as long.
I might stop for a snack and some water along the way. I might sit and hug the tree for a while.
But sleeping, resting, downtime, reading is you preparing your tools. It's you replenishing your stores of energy. It's not lazy. It's not, oh, nice for some. It's the people who are the most productive usually are the people who look after themselves the most.
Yep.
Love it.
Amazing.
Well, Linda, if people are like, oh my God, I need to know more, which I'm sure they will be because your work is fascinating, where do they find you?
Two places. My website is singingbirdcoaching.com. So that's Singing Bird Coaching. And then I'm also on Instagram under the same handle, Singing Bird Coaching. That's pretty much the main social media channel that I am fairly regular on.
And totally follow Linda. She does the best reels. She does dancing. She does all sorts of things. And if for whatever reason you can't find her, ping me an email, info@suzannekolberg.com, and I will link you up. Thank you so much for joining me today, Linda. I'll have to have you back for the next iteration of this energy.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks for listening, everybody. Bye for now.